Morning, good afternoon, good evening, guys, girls. I'm going to be talking today from the story in Mark chapter 5, verses 25 to 35. It's the story of a woman who had an issue of blood. Feel free if you want to pause me right now and go and read it yourself. Now, under the law, this woman was to be considered unclean. Anything or anyone she touched was also considered unclean. As a result, she couldn't mix with people in public, as she would cause them to be defiled or unclean as well. She couldn't go to the women's court of the temple because she was unclean. She couldn't be married because she would make her husband unclean. And if she had been married, her husband would have been forced to divorce her for the same reasons. She couldn't work around others because of the danger of others being defiled or made unclean. So her condition left her on the outside of society, not wanted, not loved, not cared for. And she had been plagued with this condition for 12 years. She had spent all of her money on doctors and physicians looking for a cure, and nothing had worked. She'd used up all her money, and now she had nothing left to live on. Then she heard about Jesus, and faith and hope was birthed in her heart, and she believed that all she had to do was touch the garments of Jesus, and she would be healed. Now, to do that, to get to Jesus, she had to push through the crowds. Firstly, for her, this would have required an incredible amount of strength and effort and perseverance, because remember, she'd had this condition for 12 years, and it would have left her frail, weak, and not very strong, no energy. Secondly, by pushing through the crowd, everybody she touched would have been made unclean or defiled. So if the crowd had discovered who she was, I believe they would have become incredibly angry and hurt her and possibly even stoned her. But for her, this risk of being discovered was worth it. So she used up all her energy, all her strength to get to Jesus. Because in her heart, she had faith that once she touched his garments, she would be healed. When she was near enough to him, she reached out a hand and she touched his garment. Now the word touched means to cling to or to adhere to. So in other words, she held on to him until she got what she came after. Yes. And it says in the Bible, immediately she received what none of the doctors could give her. She experienced healing instantly. She felt the change in her body. And she now knew that from now on, things were going to be different. See, I believe this story shows us that if you are prepared to push through your difficulties, not worry about what people might think, and make your number one priority touching Jesus, then you will get your healing and, more importantly, salvation. Now notice in verse 5, Jesus calls her daughter. Now this is important because it signifies the fact that they are now in a different relationship. You see, Jesus would have known who touched her, so he didn't have to turn around and ask, but he did. He chose to turn around and say, who touched me? And so what Jesus was doing when he turned around and asked, who touched me? He was asking the woman to look at him, to acknowledge him, to believe in him. So she got more than just physical healing that day. Her faith brought her into a soul-saving relationship with Jesus Christ. Yes. Are you willing to do whatever it takes to be with Jesus? Chasing after Jesus and making him your number one priority could cost you your job, And maybe even some of your friends who are getting tired of you always talking about Jesus, or you don't want to do this anymore with us and you don't want to do that. We don't want you. You've changed. So making Jesus number one priority will and could very well cost you some of your friends and maybe your job, because your boss might ask you to steal or lie about something. And as a Christian, you can't do that. Are you willing to pay that cost? Are you willing to be pushed away by people? The woman in the story didn't care what might happen to her. All she wanted was to touch Jesus. How much do you want him? How much are you willing to obey him? I think personally, for some of us, we have it too easy in our culture. We fit Jesus into our lives when it suits us. For example, you might come home, have the day off work, and you've spent that evening 5-6 hours doing whatever you choose to do. And then before you go to bed, you realize you haven't spent time with God. So then, okay, Lord, I know, I'll give you 5 minutes of my time. See, we need to have this attitude that the woman had in going after Jesus, that there is only one focus. Get into Jesus. And once we get him and we have him in our lives, then we need to do everything we can to keep him at the number one priority in our lives. Let's not play games with God. And like the woman in the story, let's go after God, Jesus, with everything we've got and serve him with everything we've got, regardless of the cost. And there will be a cost. Following Jesus costs us everything we have, because everything we have now belongs to him. Amen.